So we said we're doing part 2.
Yeah, and it
Pablo.
came, Pablo, yeah.
Blanquito. Bill Smart.
Bill Smart, yeah.
Can I just start by saying that I've just done a half-hour video with you before, and I was so pleased that Bill would be here, because for me, growing up, Bill was really important visually for me. Without Bill, I would never have been the expressive person I was. Sounds like overkill, but the reality was, without him expressing himself and me seeing him publicly doing that, I would not have expressed myself, and that's what I became known for. So Billy is, even without knowing it, is responsible for my freedom in the way that I dress. And we're going to talk about clothing, am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Billy. You're the man.
Well, thank you for throwing that one at me and absolutely embarrassing me. But thank you very much.
You deserve your flowers, mate.
Thank you. I'm taking the bouquet now. Yeah, it was, the fashion was probably one of the most important things. It wasn't just about the music. It gave you a connection to another group of people. And for me, it all started with Northern Soul. And it was really, really simple: cap sleeves, t-shirts, baggy trousers, baggy jeans. I had an American snake belt that was really important. I had a massive Afro, which I loved to shake around in Wigan Casino.
Have you got any photos of that?
I think I've got a picture of my Afro, but but I was really, really young, and I was in a dressing gown at the time when the picture was taken. I don't know why I was in a dressing gown, I just was. But I remember there was a divide at that time between a new music that had just come across, and being very connected to Northern Soul. But my friends were just like, why are you going there? Why are you doing this? It was almost like we were splitting up and changing. And I always remember saying to one person, why can't I like both? So I was getting into the funk, I was getting into disco, I was getting into jazz funk. And then going to different venues and meeting different people. But it was very emotional, that sort of split. And the DJs at the time were people like Colin Curtis, Ian Levine. I can't really think of anyone else at the time, but Colin Curtis was a mainstream for me. And then from Wigan, we used to go to an all-nighter. And then on the Sunday, we would get the train to Victoria train station. We'd get changed into toilets. It would be Hawaiian shirts. It would be so almost like +4 trousers, white. And then we'd have pointed shoes on with metal tips at the end of it. And then we'd have weave belts doubled round our waist. And then we'd wear sort of like Mr. Lawrence. We'd wear one of those hats on top of it. And then we'd get into the club. But they were from Leeds, and where else were they from?
Sheffield. Yeah, the northern area that all came to Manchester to party, because we were renowned as a place where we had excellent music and people could feel comfortable being there. And as you said before, and this is very true, although there was no rivalry between those when people were in the same venue except on the dance floor. You know, and that set the scene for all other scenes after that, all the way up to Electro, where people challenged each other and danced against each other, and you were looking at how incredible people moved, you know, how important that was to us. For me, going back to when I started, it was funk belts, which were wrapped over and hung down like this. It was boating shoes. It was jumbo cords, velour V-necks. All of those things were critical to how we perceived ourselves. And you wanted to be part of something, because it is all tribal ultimately. And we wanted to be part of something, but we also wanted to express ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's cool to be in a group of people where you feel completely comfortable and you can be yourself. And that's very difficult, and very difficult for working class northern people. So, you know, clubs were one of those places where you could do that. And
it was, I think you alluded to, it was very difficult to get into places. I didn't have that problem because I worked in one of the best shops in the city at the time, which was Jonathan Silver's, which a lot of people will remember. And I think having access to those clothes, I mean, I've got a bloody good discount, so, you know, and they encourage us to sort of like take clothes, not literally, but they would say, why don't you wear that tonight when you're going out, and see what the response is. And you could guarantee that within the week, people were coming in buying those clothes.
Where was it?
Jonathan Silver's. The one I worked was on Ridgefield, which is where Venus Club was, in the back streets of King Street. And it was upstairs. I think it's south.
Yeah.
is downstairs, and then there was a cafeteria upstairs, like a restaurant. But that was the shop that I worked in, and it was also, I think, one of the things that happened was that particular racial groups could not get into the bars, into the city, or the clubs. It was literally, it was a bar. The words were, "You've got to be a member," and yet they never checked anybody else. So the lads, when they were coming into town, it was also same for the shops. They would walk into a shop and it was like, "Sorry, you can't come in, mate," because the insinuation was that you're going to rob us, you're going to steal from us. And it was so negative until in the end, I think people just decided, hang on, okay, we're going to do exactly what you fear.
Yeah.
And so then people started employing people of colour in their shops, and it was that defined at the time.
And
What
further
you
down the
talking
line,
about?
remember the guys who were working Richard Creme, for example. You know, they were
he was
showing
a
out.
tall guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, they were showing out for their areas. They would wear Gaultier and things like that, which nobody else was wearing back then. And so that whole thing about being given clothes in order to be able to promote something. The joke about all of that is that Richard Creme would open for people like Janet Jackson and, you know, Prince and whatever else. But everything was super expensive and intentionally so.
Yeah.
You know, imported stuff, Issey Miyake and Yohji Yamamoto and all
Yeah.
those kind of things. I mean, I know that lots of people went out and spent money. They spent everything they had on clothes because they wanted to look a certain way. So that concept, which I was part of because I was with people who got turned away from shops, turned away. And obviously, the way I look, I didn't have the same problem unless I was in a group of people. But it was pretty prohibitive in terms of what you could and could not do in the city centre. And people think of Manchester as being this queer as folk, open-minded city. But actually, for a long time, it was very, very negative towards people that were slightly different or different at all.
And certainly on racial levels as well.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, and it's something that the city has identified and recognised, and they were ashamed of. But it sort of came from a really dark age. Particularly, there was a chief constable, James Anderson.
Yeah.
Oh, that man was so restrictive and such a hypocrite, really. But anyway,
Yeah, stop and
allegedly,
search, sus laws, all of that
sus
stuff.
laws, you know.
You know, that was where the riots came from, really. People were just sick of being stopped and of police just approaching you and speaking to you because you happen to be black and you're in a certain area. When you think of what goes on in America now, this was going on in Britain also. Obviously, not to the same degree in the sense that people are not getting killed. Not many people, let's say some people were. But for us, at least, as people who wanted to dress a certain way, it was critical that we were able to access places and go to shops. And, you know, Manchester had this independent shopping thing, really, didn't it?
Yeah.
Where it was small shops that had defined clothing that people really wanted.
I think it was mainly when I worked in the Arndale Centre when it first opened. Literally, I worked in a company called Jeanery before I went to Jonathan Silver's, and that whole sort of Americanized shopping experience sort of came in, and I remember saying to somebody, it frightens me because of the independence.
100%.
The independent shops, the sort of single owner, and they were frightened of it. But in the end, it did go that way with the high street shops coming in and the independents. I mean, I was a part owner of a shop called the Emporium, and it was, you know, my idea was to bring things in that were different, and the majority of people would say, oh, well, I couldn't wear that, but I knew that there was enough people who could. And then when things like Flesh started, but not just Flesh, there were people that would sort of like connoisseurs of fashion. They would come in, and that would expand the labels, you know, out to the street. But the independent shops, give me some of the few of them.
Well, for me, it was places like Geese, X-Clothing, you know, all those kind of places that were really unique places. And Geese constantly moved from one shop to another and had really unique interiors. The place, was it called the Emporium? The one that was in the Arches on the way down Whitworth Street towards. There was a guy called Gerald's brother worked in there, and it had a lot of the young designers, really cool clothing.
Was it going down towards the Hacienda?
Yes,
it was on the left side, in the Arches. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the shop.
And Gangsters ended up closing that down and giving him PTSD because of his experience with dealing with Salford gangsters or whoever it was that closed it, Cheating Mill, I don't remember. But we supported those shops, those small shops. We want Oasis was a big deal in the underground market. going back to that thing. So Oasis obviously took their name from that shop. And then on top of that, you had Zico's, which was huge for the black community. It was really important because everything that came out of America ended up being there or recreated in that style.
Do you know, I'm older now, so I'm not going to know. But listening to you both, there isn't... So when I first started going out, there was like these places like Geese and then Affleck's Palace. You'd go in and almost like going to the record shop and you would get your clothes for the outfit.
Yeah.
And the alternative scene would congregate in certain clothes shops. But I don't think they have that now, do they? I don't think that exists.
No, I mean, anything that was of any significance, anything that was important, going back to Carl Twig, we talked about that before, anything that was of significance has gone, which is really sad because you could go and individually pick things from different shops. I mean, the first time I ever saw Stone Island was in Carl Twig, you know, and there were Japanese brands in there that I'd never heard of before, and Comme des Garçons came, you know, things
Michiko Casino. I always remember wearing a really big top. It was oversized with that, and people were literally trying to say the name as I was walking past. Mikiko, and it was hilarious. But I think the whole thing of dress and fashion, it was a ceremony. It wasn't just about just putting the clothes on. No. It was getting the bag, walking down the street, getting on the bus. People were looking at that bag. And you get home.
You kept those bags.
Yeah.
I've still got Geese bags at home.
Have you?
Yeah, you kept those bags because they clipped together at the top and they were beautiful looking and they were, you know, they had things embossed on them sometimes. You're right in what you say. The whole thing was about a process.
Yeah.
You know, you wanted people to see where you've been shopping. Yeah. And then that night when you went out, although there was a lot of similarity, I always remember when people started wearing brooches up here and on their shirts. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was a big deal during the early 80s and everybody would really dress up when Luther was big and all those kind of guys.
But that also came with the New Romantic as well. So
did,
there was like a crossover between the two, that you could take something from one and then you could add it to the other. And I always remember buying it was a tie pin, but it was really big and it had 2 jewels on the end. And then I got like a little brooch that had like little jewels around it, and I wore it. I put them on together. And then I found another pin just to put into a tweed jacket, you know, and then you'd wear like a tweed jacket, hacking jacket, jodhpurs, and then you'd have sort of what I call hunting boots on. You look like you just come...
Do you remember Jive Hive? So Jive Hive, which was opposite All Saints, next to Johnny Roadhouse.
Yes.
It was incredible. The first time I ever was able to buy cashmere was in Jive Hive.
Yeah.
And it was the stuff you could buy. You could buy things that... Literally, aquascutum jackets that were from the 20s that had been handmade for someone, and they had the person's name on the inside, and you'd pick them up for a couple of quid.
Yeah.
You know, that whole concept of second-hand clothing, obviously it's become huge now.
I mean, the thing was that think of where his position was. He was right, Oxford Road, way down from the BBC. But what was across the road? It was the university.
Exactly, the students.
You know, or the Polytechnic as it was then before it became the university. So... And that was a natural pathway. They'd wear those clothes and they'd go to the student union at the Poly student union, and that's where people like Mick Hucknall and Simply Red started. Well, Mick Hucknall started because he took over from a brother who was a DJ then, and then Paul went to work for Virgin Records on the International on Market Street when that Virgin first opened.
Yeah, I remember that.
So it's there's a lot of memories. But anyway, we were going back to wearing that outfit, walking into a club, and by that time, the doorman, they knew that got to bring these people in, because they're going to dance on the dance floor. They had to. They had no choice in the end. They had no choice.
And that reached critical point, I think, when people started dancing to soul and funk, and then the electro. They had to have dances in there because the people that went in and danced often were not actually what people perceived them to be. They were there to show out, and their friends were there, and they were all. We talked about balletic dancing before. It was a show.
Yeah,
people put on a show for one another. You know, they danced in a way that was similar to Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. That, you know, they take those things. And Nicholas Brothers, they were all really critically important to people's perception and what they wanted to look like. I remember wearing spats, zoot suits, you know, those things, and hats. Really, really important when the second wave of jazz came through. Incredible, and I think we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about that part of culture, which is for other people in other cities like New York and, you know, Paris. All those places talk about their culture of clothing, London. We don't.
Yeah.
And we had our own unique style. We did look different from other people, and we were, proud of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember. I mean, you talked about the internationals, but there was a club called Set in Paris, and it had a spiral staircase, and the dance floor was downstairs, and the bars were upstairs. And I just remember I would not have got into that place if it hadn't been for the way that I was dressed. And then you went over to New York, and you had Paradise Garage, and then you had a Danceteria, but you had Studio 54. Well, I told you that night that I went to Studio 54.
Oh, yeah,
it was a really crap night. it was really, really bad. It was, excuse my French, it was pissing it down.
Yeah.
It'd be bad if you didn't get in, wouldn't it?
And then we ended up going to Paradise Garage, which was further up. And there was another one, I don't know if it was it called Xenon? Xenon?
Yeah,
Xenon?
X. Yeah.
Yeah, X, yeah. And that, but it was just coming, it was coming to the end of disco. You know, you could see that other things were coming in.
It was a very hedonistic scene.
Yeah.
I mean, vividly, I remember going out and seeing people really express themselves, but you didn't really quite understand how important it was for certain people to be in that environment and be free, to be who they were. Paradise Garage is a great example. People went there because they could dance all night to music that was being created as they stood there, or had been created to the day before by people like Larry Levan.
Yeah.
And then they would dance till dawn and come out.
Yeah.
And it was a garage, literally, you know?
And they, you know, I always remember someone telling me about Quaaludes. You know, it was part of the culture. So yeah, it was.
And this is the thing about drugs, that people perceive it to be starting around the Hacienda. What you don't realise is back in Northern Soul, from beyond that onwards, there was always drugs involved.
There was there was speed, there was Phylon, there was Chalkies.
So what was it with Northern Soul? Was it blues? Was it amphetamine tablets?
Just amphetamine tablets.
Keep
Is
it
it
going.
easy to get hold of?
Yeah. There was always somebody. There was always, you do your order. You do your order midweek, and then it'd be a case of getting to the car, and then it'd be shared out, and you know, and then you'd get there, and just before you got in, you'd take it.
And people would take bags with them, obviously, and in those bags they held whatever they wanted in there.
Would it, like, when I first started going out, it was like a gram of speed. Would speed be in a tablet then in Northern Soul?
The only things that was the Phylon and the Chalkies. The Phylon and Chalkies were both tablets that you could get a prescription for. I don't know how we got hold of them, but we did. But they kept you up all night.
Yeah.
There was a terrible downer with them as well. But I wouldn't have admitted. But you danced all night, and you were exhibitionists as well.
Yeah.
100%.
100%, you know, yeah.
Do you know one thing I've noticed? I don't know much about Northern Soul, but I'll learn as I go along. But young people are into it at the moment, aren't they? So I see Instagram videos, everyone's wearing Fred Perry.
Yeah.
It looks to me like they've got it wrong because they all look the same. Everyone wants to say it, I can't imagine it.
But I think with Northern, and this is no disrespect, the dancing was very uniform.
Yeah.
But you would have the odd person who was like a gymnast that would do a flip.
Would be unique.
I couldn't do flips, but he would do a flip, and then you'd stand back in awe. But it was as you moved on and you started going to places like the Ritz, and then you'd go over to Leeds Central, you know, and then you'd start seeing the jazz funk, and that sort of came in with the disco as well, as that was filtered in. And that's what drew me into it.
And those jazz funk dancers who danced in different styles depending on what city you were from, then developed into fusion dancers who were there at the very, very start of house, and were the people that went to those house gigs before it broke. And those people were dancing in a style that was very similar to jazz funk, very, very gymnastic, you know, jumping through their hand and stuff like that. Those people became really, really important. Everybody went out and saw them, and then they took over the dance floor. But if you were a peacock, or you were somebody who wanted to be seen and you enjoyed dancing, you would be happy to have people stood around you. And sometimes you would have, you know, partners who would come and dance with you all the time, and those same people would know how you danced, and it would look incredible, and people would say afterwards, wow, you're so good at dancing, or your dancing's amazing. And that made you feel good for the rest of the week. You could go away feeling like, you know what?
Well, it was a place.
Mean something to somebody.
It was a place that you could be the king and you could be the queen.
100%.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter. There wasn't a class level. Absolutely no class level. It was an open arena. People arrived looking good, and sometimes the outfits cost a few pounds. And we used to go down to London. we'd go down the King's Road. So we did Seditionary, we did Boys, which is
Yeah.
Malcolm McLaren's places. We went to the Blitz. But what you were wearing would cost you a few pounds. The rich, I mean, they would be wearing sort of Vivienne Westwood, and it wasn't that expensive in the sense of where it went, and a lot of it was second hand.
And then in the 80s, you end up with places like Flip, which were giant, you know,
Big stores.
that had amazing tubs full of things that had been brought over from America, jeans, jackets, MA1 jackets, and then suddenly everybody started to get into that utilitarian kind of look with the jeans in a certain way, Doc Martens, and that was a way that you could dress up and look like a lot of other people, but you could change it in your own way, you'd have your own little bit of style to it.
I think what you've just described now reminds me of when I saw Jimmy Somerville in the Communards, when he did Don't Leave Me This Way. Just watch that video and watch what he's wearing, where the 501s with the red tab, the Doc Martin boots. So it was, you know, jacket, so it was like the skinhead style was there, and people would sort of think that if you were a skinhead, you were a racist. I met so many skinheads who would, they weren't, but there were others that were. Yeah. So again,
because the style was so clean, people wanted to look that way. You know, wanted to, especially when that first, second 1980s kind of two-tone thing arrived, where everyone started to wear really smart clothing and who were into that scene, but they still wore Doc Martens at the bottom, and they would wear like two-tone style suits that had come from the 50s, the style, and things do go round, no question about it. But I think the identity of people was very different than we had. I think we had an identity. We tried to make ourselves an identity. Now I feel like it's a bit more homogenous. It's difficult to see peacocks anywhere anymore, and if they do see them, you're a bit like
a peacock?
Somebody who was prepared to dress and be exactly who they are and show out all the time. Yeah. Wear your pink cap and walk down the street with pride and don't care what anybody else thinks. You wear your sister's t-shirt, all that kind of stuff because it looked good. And this thing about wearing clothes from the opposite sex was normal for us.
Do you know what? My head was just going into that. I remember going into, was it Bus Stop? Mm-hmm. And they, thank God, I had a 26-inch waistline. Where has it gone? But I had a between the 26 and the 28 waist. And it was sale time in Bus Stop. There was another one, C&A. And they had these amazing sort of trousers that they sort of came out and they had buttons all the way up. Obviously, it was girls, so they had buttons all the way up the front. And I bought them in the sale for like £3-4, took them home, and I sort of said, I think I had all the buttons taken off, and I said, can you just position them completely different? So instead of being down, I had them all the way around, underneath the belt, so you could just see them on top. And I was in a club, and the girl comes walking over to me, and she went, where did you get your pants from? I had the same ones from her. And I said, they're from Bus Stop. And she said, well, I didn't see them. I said, I know, I've just had the buttons moved.
Do you remember a brand called Willy Wear? The designer died quite young.
What was his name? Willie? Was it Willie Young?
He died of...
he had AIDS.
Wasn't it? And he made very alternative but beautiful clothes out of lovely material, but that could be worn by men or women. And like I say, back in the 80s, you had the option to dress in a way that was very different. Yeah, you would get pulled by idiots in the bus station who would shout, things at you and whatever else. But if you had strength in yourself and you believed in yourself, and I go back to what I said before, Billy and people like Billy were the reason why people like me could wear those things and get away with it and be myself and be known for wearing extravagant clothing and stuff like that. And, it takes somebody to break the mold in the first place, and I'm bigging him up, but he knows I'm right.
Do you know we talked before about your clothes shop, and you imported clothes from Italy, didn't you? I bet you probably brought some labels to Manchester for the first time.
I always remember the main one that we brought, which was a denim, well, it started off as a denim range, and we saw it in Paris. We were doing buying at the time, and it was called Soviet.
Oh, I remember that.
And it was denim that was different, and it was expensive. And I remember when we went on the stand, it was a man called Massimo, we approached him and we told him that we were a single selling unit, but we wanted exclusivity for the first season and we were willing to put in an order. And I think people weren't looking at it, but the way I saw it was a time of perestroika.
Yeah.
So there was a political side. It was about openness. So I knew that everything was going to be Russia, 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 Russia.
And it was,
And the
wasn't it?
symbolism, and it
Yeah.
was. And so it came in, and it landed perfectly, especially in the windows, and people saw the sort of red star. But because there was lots of positive things coming out about Russia, people sort of thought, oh, I like that. And they would buy it, as with the Japanese flag.
Yeah.
That became a really, really popular thing as well.
And if you remember Ball and brands like that,
Ball
that came
jeans,
out, they were
yeah.
incredible
Yeah.
because it was just a higher quality product.
Yeah.
Everything that
Fiorucci.
yeah, exactly.
Fiorucci.
Fiorucci was amazing
Oh.
because they made relatively cheap clothes but beautifully made. And I remember vividly having a Fiorucci backpack and going to Paris wearing the jeans were Cerruti, I think, with Basque-Wegians at the bottom
Yeah.
and a lovely like Gautier jean jacket. And
But you loved your high-end labels,
well,
though.
dandyism was a big deal. I went to work purely so I could buy those things.
Yeah.
You know, I looked to try and spend money and want to look different. And I think a lot of people that I knew were the same. You know, you wanted to be, like you said before, you walk into the club, you feel like a king.
Yeah.
Whether or not the rest of the week you just slaving away or not, it don't matter.
Taking sandwiches to work.
Totally, yeah.
One final thing is, I will always remember my favourite outfit ever. And I got it from the Army and Navy store on the was it on the King's Road? And wherever it was massive. And I was really into Roxy music. And I thought, I need an outfit for this concert. I can't remember the name of the place that we went to. No, this was in London.
Oh, sorry.
So it was the Electric something circus?
Ballroom.
Electric Ballroom.
Yeah.
So it was Roxy music. And I'd arrived in the morning, so it was on the Saturday, so I'd arrived in the morning from Southport, and we ended up going to, looking down the shops, too expensive, and it was just like, I'm going to look like, I'm going to use the term, I'm going to look like shit. And someone said, come on, let's go to the Army Navy store. Walked in, and they had collarless shirts, didn't even wash them. What a tramp. Collarless shirt that I had down to here. I found a massive baggy pair of camouflage trousers. I already had the boots, so I put that on, and I got a green sort of really tight-fitting jacket. It was wrong size for me, but it looked good, so it was all pulled in. And then I got one of those Arabic scarves to put it around my neck and over my head. And I remember walking to the door, and I knew that the outfit had taken focus, because people were just like that. So there was no issue of getting in, you know.
Yeah,
and again, that's what we're going back to.
Yeah, looking a certain way so that you stood out from everybody else, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right in what you say. It's important to talk about things like, you know, the thing that the outfit you love the most and how you put it together yourself. Because I remember vividly that I used to wear, what were they called? Long johns.
Yeah.
With a pair of Doc Martin sort of, you know, the shoes that pulled on and they didn't have any laces. What were they called? You know what I'm talking about? The things on the side.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Like the Palladiums.
like that.
Yeah.
The thick sole.
Yeah.
And a pair of long johns and then a shirt with no collar. And nobody else was wearing that stuff, but you knew that it looked good. So you were prepared to do it, prepared to wear it and prepared to, you know, show out. And you
Never
know,
show
we
your
were all about
parents,
that.
so
No.
what are you going out in your
What are you wearing them? Yeah.
What are you going out in your
Wearing them in
underwear
your bed.
for?
Yeah, exactly.
No, that was great. They were great days. But it was, for me, thank you for reminding me of such great times.
I think it's important that we talk about it because I do think it just gets completely overrun and we forget that there's more to it than just the music and the drugs. Although we touched on both of those things within the same thing there. It is about the culture in general, how you want it to be perceived and all the rest of it.
And if you go through the different ages, you'll find that if you go to the time of from Charles II with the Restoration, and you start moving further and further up in the time frame, you'll see there's always been this period. Use the word of dandification.
Yeah.
I just say that it was about the extreme style.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you go through every single age, 1920s, 30s, obviously the war period was different, into the 50s, into the 60s.
But someone starts it and then eventually people catch up.
And it becomes mainstream.
That's what happens.
That's where I'm at now.
So you need mavericks like Bill. Without that, it just won't happen.
Thank you very
So
much.
I think I'll stop recording now. I think we've
How
hit
much have we
the,
done?
Half hour spot. Half hour.
Brilliant.